All right, Chevra, good morning. Before we go on the Chabad.org camera, just to respond to Yaakov's question regarding different types of mosquitoes or other flying creatures that are very uncomfortable or that they actually do damage to the person. So what we learned was actually extremely important when we learned on Daf Lamed Vav Amid Beis, the Havamina de Maskana regarding trapping bees. Bees is not a creature that is normally trapped. And indeed, this does affect halacha l'maisa. The Alter Rebbe paskins in Shin Tezayin. First of all, in halacha Dalid, that ein isur tseidam in atoyda ela b'davar sheyesh b'mina nitzait, which means that all of these bugs and creatures, trapping them is only asur midrabanan, even though it's asur midrabanan. Number one, in halacha Yud Zayin, therefore, the Alter Rebbe paskins that any creature like snakes and scorpions, even if their bite won't kill you, but if their bite will damage you, you are allowed to trap them on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. And on Halacha Yud Ches, the Alter Rebbe writes, but that's only if they're going to be mazik you. If they only make you uncomfortable, and the example that he uses is mosquitoes, I'm not talking about the mosquitoes that you have in your location. But if it's something that is only inconveniencing you, then you can only trap it while it's biting you. You have to look inside, see if Yud Ches in the Shulchan Aruch. If it's going to be mazik you, since number one, say there's only midrabanan because she'ein b'minoi nitzait, like we learned yesterday, and really more than that, it's malacha she'ein etzricha legufa because you don't want the creature that you're trapping. You just don't want it to bite you. So therefore, that's the Alter Rebbe's difference. If it's mazik you, you can trap it. If it's only making you uncomfortable, then you have to wait until it's biting you. And while it's biting you, then you can grab it without killing it and throw it away. Go try that if that works. Good. With the help of Hashem, we are learning the Alter Rebbe. We are learning Beitzah. We're going to be learning today Daf Lamed Zayin. We actually left off on Daf Lamed Vav Amid Beis, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We had the Mishnah that categorized rabbinic prohibitions of Shabbos and Yom Tov. Normally, the word that's used is shavus. Don't do it. But the Mishnah actually said there's shavus, reshus, and mitzvah. Shavus means, and it refers to an activity that has no mitzvah element involved with it at all, like climbing a tree. And the Chazal said, don't do it. Then you have other activities that have a mitzvah element. Normally, mitzvah element, it's called mitzvah. Being that we are also using the word mitzvah, so relative to mitzvah, we're calling that reshus. And then you have mamash mitzvahs, obligations. And you have from all 3 categories isurim, and they are both equal, Shabbos and in Yom Tov, as the Mishnah concluded, that ein bein Yom Tov l'Shabbos ela oichel nefesh bulvad. So we're going to go through the cases of the Mishnah, and we will explain why did the Chazal say that it's asur. We're going to be learning, for example, about the prohibition of mekach umemkar, of doing commerce on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. And yes, I know that we learned before that commerce, if you don't specify a measurement and if you don't specify a number amount, a money number amount, so on Yom Tov there are exceptions. But the general isur of mekach umemkar, we're going to learn a very important Rashi today on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph that actually gives 2 approaches in how he understands the isur of mekach umemkar that are extremely important to halacha l'maisa. One is what Rashi calls asur min hamikra. Mikra doesn't mean the 5 books of Moses. Mikra means scripture. It's based on the pasuk in Yeshayahu of V'daber davar. And then Rashi writes what is more commonly known, that it's a bona fide isur midrabanan, because you might end up writing documents as we will be learning today. We're going to also see the source of Shitas HaRaivit concerning all muksa. That one of the, and the Alter Rebbe brings down the Raivit in Shin Ches in the beginning when he brings the 3 reasons for muksa. One of them is because you might end up carrying it. Don't handle certain things because it's almost like a geded, not to end up transporting it. And as we will see, these are actually the words that we will have in our Gemara. We're going to begin at least today on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph on the bottom of the Mishnah, the sugya about chum. Now, Cheve, for those of us who learned Masechta Shabbos, and we all should learn Masechta Shabbos, we're going to learn the general concept of tchumen. Whether we're going to follow the shita that there is a certain distance that even midoiraisa, one may not walk beyond that. Let's go with the 12 mil. or the rabbinic 1 mil. 1 mil is 2,000 amas. That one may not walk beyond your initial place of taking in Shabbos. Midrabanan, and the Isurei Tchum is both on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. Being that on Yom Tov you're allowed to carry, we pass like Basilol, we can do Hoitzah because Mitoich Shehutra Hoitzah, L'tzorech Oichel Nefesh, Hutra Nami, Shaloi L'tzorech Oichel Nefesh, and we already spoke out the three-way Machlokes Rishonim. Exactly what does Shaloi L'tzorech mean? It's not making, but you can carry things. So we're going to learn that my possessions are bound to my Tchum. And then we will learn details. It's not about who owns it, but it's about who is in control of that item when Shabbos or Yom Tov comes in. So for example, if I own animals and you are a shepherd, and I gave my animals over to you before Yom Tov came in, then my animals are bound to the shepherd's tchum. We're going to learn that if you have two partners owning, they commonly own an item. Let's go Yom Tov. Yom Tov you can carry. But each of these two partners, they have another tchum, as we'll speak out when we learn today. We'll review these dinim, which means that I can only go to the south of the city 1,000 amas, not 2. You can only, my partner can only go to the north 1,000. Since it belongs to 2 people, the item can only be transported to an area that both of the partners are allowed to walk in, and not beyond that. So each person's limit will limit the item. The item will become a lot more limited. That's going to lead us into the sugya of Bereira, as we will see how important this concept of retroactive qualification is. We're going to learn here on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis. We're going to be in the middle of the sugya. The suggestion, which is actually accepted halacha l'maisa, that when it comes to biblical mitzvahs, biblical dinim, there we paskin that we don't say that there is retroactive clarification, ein b'reira. When it comes to rabbinic dinim, like tchumen, we paskin tchumen is midrabanan, then we say yesh b'reira, and a lot more. Let's start again on the Lamed Vav Amud Beis, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid. The Mishnah continued, ve'elu hein, right? We're referring back to the Mishnah, bishum rishus. So we went through Shavuos. Shavuos, the examples the Mishnah gave was not, you can't climb a tree, you can't ride on an animal, you can't swim in a river, you can't slap your thighs, you can't dance. And now the next case is that we're not allowed to adjudicate. Problem is that whenever 2 people are having a dispute, the judges are performing a mitzvah. It's not the reshus. Reshus we are interpreting as there was some mitzvah element. 3 judges sitting down to judge a case is not some mitzvah element. They're doing a mitzvah. Now, the Gemara is not suggesting that it should be permitted. We are only asking, according to Rashi, why are we putting the loy dunin in the category of reshus for a mitzvah ka'avid? It's a bona fide mitzvah. Says the Gemara loy. No, that's not a question. Sricha, it's needed. In other words, the putting dunin in the category of reshus is only when the adif mine, when you live in a location where there are judges, there are rabbanim that are more qualified than you. We're not speaking about them being your teacher. Then you may not judge. We're speaking about where there are other greater people. So then it's upon the greatest, most knowledgeable people in this location, they should be the ones that are judging. On them, it's an obligation. On everyone else, if they actually assume the role of judge, if they're qualified, and it's not sliding the ones that are even more knowledgeable, they're doing something that has some mitzvah element to it, but it's called reshus, and it's not called mitzvah. According to Rashi, clearly, neither may be done on Shabbos. And I know there are exceptions, but that's the rule, that we don't adjudicate, at least not financial cases, on Shabbos nor on Yom Tov. The last line in the Amid, v'loy mikachin, we may not consecrate a woman. Let's not forget that marriage in Torah is a 2-step process, kiddushin and nisuyin. We're going to focus here on kiddushin. And as we know, not just the chazer b'kitzur, that there is a machlokes and Rambam and the Rosh where the marriage is a mitzvah. Of course, having children is the greatest mitzvah. And the only way a person can have children halachically, following God's rules, is when a Jewish man marries a Jewish woman. In the context of marriage, that's where they may have children. But the question is marriage a mitzvah? says the Rambam, or the Rosh says marriage is machshire mitzvah. It's a preliminary mitzvah. And either both the Rambam and the Rosh will have to make an effort to understand either the question or the answer of this Gemara. So the Gemara is asking, how can we put kiddushin, giving the ring today, giving something, the bishleisha. The Mishnah says in the beginning of Kedushin, whether it's Kesef, Shtar, or Bia, however you are affecting the first step of consecration, that's called Rishus, some mitzvah element. Well, mitzvah, if it's a bona fide mitzvah, it's mashma like the Rambam. Then we'll see the answer, mashma like the Rosh. So the Gemara says, Lo, it's needed. There is lay isha ubanim daflamet zayin. The person already has a wife and children. Very interesting that the Gemara doesn't say that he has children already. And like Rashi points out, machlekes b'shamai and b'silul, what is the minimum amount of children that one must have to fulfill his obligation of pru'uravu? Lebeshamai, 2 sons. Lebesilul, a son or a daughter. Even though, truth be told, even when you have 2 sons or a son and a daughter, you only get the mitzvah when they get married and you have from both of your children, you have a grandson and a granddaughter with the pratim of how it has to happen. But anyways, you already fulfilled your mitzvah. So now that you already fulfilled your mitzvah, even though there's a pasuk in Koheles that is quoted, and the pasuk quotes Baboiker Zara Ezarach. When you are younger in the morning, in your youth, you should have children. Ula Arev, and in the evening, which means even when you're older, meaning even though you already fulfilled the mitzvah, Al Tanach Yodecha, don't rest, don't put your hands down. But that's called a mitzvah element, but you're not mechuyev. And therefore, the Mishnah puts it in the category of Rishus. This is mamish, mashma like the Rosh. The Rambam will understand the Gemara's answer. Of course, it's a mitzvah to get married. But why on Yom Tov? You can get married out of Yom Tov. You can get married Matzah Yom Tov. You're not mechuyev to get married right now. That's why it's called, according to the Rambam that holds that it's taka mitzvah, it's called Rishus, because since you already have children. So the timing is called the timing of Rishus. Right. Also, the Mishnah put these in the categories of Rishus. Before I go on, what about Nesuyin? So not for now, but we have this already online, that the big Ran in the beginning of Ksubos actually considers Nesuyin, the second step of marriage, also as a kinyan. And the common denominator of all these prohibitions on Shabbos and on Yom Tov is we may not affect a kinyan on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. So if Nesuyin is considered a kinyan, then Nesuyin will also be prohibited on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. If we're going to say that the actual marriage itself is not called a kinyan, then one will be allowed to affect Nesuyin on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. The only prohibition will be to affect the Kiddushin. And we'll leave it at that.
What's a kinyan?
Kinyan means an act of an acquisition, a transaction. Even though the word transaction is a poor word to be used when it comes to marriage, but the first step is considered there's some sort of transaction. There's a certain type of change of dominium. I belong to you, you belong to me. And then the Suyin, according to some, there's no transaction happening. It's just a full merging of 2 people together, but not in a transactional way at all. Let's go on. The act of chalitza and the act of yibum, again, may not be done on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. The problem is, again, it's a mitzvah. How are we saying this is Rishus? So the Gemara says, like, Tzricha, the case of the Mishnah is the Ika Gadol, that there is an elder brother. So let's say Reuven was married to a woman. Reuven passes away without any children, not from her, not from other prior marriages, or not from out of marriage. He has no children, no grandchildren. So Reuven's brothers have a zika, have a connection to this widow, and they have to either cut it off by doing chalitza or concretize it, finalize it by doing an act of yibum. But the ideal mitzvah is on the eldest living brother. Mitzvah begadol yabim. And if the non-eldest brother is doing it, it's effective, but you can't call that mitzvah, it's called rishus. And as we have in Parshas Kiseitze, the pasuk v'hoya haBechor asher teiled Yakum al shem achiv hameis, that I've always quoted, Ein mikra yotzei midei pshutai. We're going to learn in Yavamis, the Chazal actually say, Ein mikra yotzei midei pshutai, chutz from this verse, that this pasuk is yotzei midei pshutai. There isn't a pshutei interpretation. V'hoya haBechor doesn't mean that the child that's born should be named by the brother. V'hoya haBechor means that the eldest brother has the mitzvah to marry. That's the taich of that pasuk, as we'll learn in Yevamos. Right. Now, all of these actions that may not be done. So all of the actions is adjudicating, affecting kiddushin, chalitza, and yibum. Why indeed may it not be done? So we use the word kinyan because we're doing some sort of act of acquisition, or we are making a transaction. What's wrong with making a transaction? Because you might write it down in a document. You might document, and writing is asan midoraisa. And just continuing as we left off yesterday, that the problem must be a biblical problem. If not, normally we don't make a decree to protect another decree. The Isser Midoraisa is to write. If you're going to make something that's called a kinyan, even when you adjudicate, many times the judges have to write their ruling. They don't have to write the ruling, but they end up writing the ruling. Kedushin is something that could be done, could be affected through a document. There is a document that records the chalitza. There is a ksuba that's written for the yibum. Of course, they could be done after Shabbos, after Yom Tov, but they might forget, which is why it may not be done. Now, going back to the Mishnah, the Elyahu Mishum mitzvah. What are the other examples the Mishnah gave of mitzvah items, mitzvah, which may not be done? Like Magdishin, you may not consecrate something, and there are many ways of giving something to God and to the Beis Hamikdash. One is called an act of hegdish. One is making a vow called a assessment vow, ma'arichin. One is called making a chedem. Machloikas stam chedem lebedek habayis, stam chedem lekohanim. We paskin stam chedem lebedek habayis. And why not? Now here's a challenging line. Why may you not be mekadosh something? Because you might make commerce. Because again, it's going from your dominion, you're giving it over to God's dominion. So there's a change of ownership, not between two commoners, but still, if that will be allowed, then you might do commerce. Now hold on, why may you not do commerce? We cannot make exeda. So here is a very important Rashi, 7 lines from the top of the Amid. Why may you not do commerce? How is giving something to God like commerce? Because the item that you were magdish left your dominion, left your possession, and it went into the shus hekdesh. Now, commerce is ushered by scripture, not from the 5 books of Moses, but from Nach, from Nevi'im. It says in Yeshayim, as we use this pasuk continuously in Masechta Shabbos. So it seems to be that Rashi is saying that if something is prohibited by the Nevi'im, you can make a gzeira for that. Remember that. Inami mekachumemker is also only a typical rabbinic prohibition. Why? Because if you will be allowed to do commerce, then you might end up writing a document. The obvious question is, if mekachumemker itself is only asur midrabanan, the im timer havi l'gzeira. So answers Rashi, kula chada gezeirahi. It was one gezeira. One gezeira, don't make a kinyan, don't make commerce, all one gezeira. And including in making commerce was the gezeira of not being magdish something, because the point of commerce is there is a change of ownership. Back inside the Gemara. We may not separate Trumas Umaisis. Says the Gemara Pshita, you're doing an act of tikkun. So Tanach Rabbi Yosef, or it looks like tikkun. Tanach Rabbi Yosef, what a Gemara. He says like this, that if a person separates Trumas Umaisis, and then they give what they separated on the day of Shabbos or on the day of Yom Tov, an observer, it's only about the observer. The observer won't even know that you separated the Truma to make fit that which remains. He won't focus on that. He's going to see that you took some of yours to give it to the Kohen. Understand? We don't share. We're supposed to share on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. So it doesn't look like you made a separation to fix what remains with you. It looks like you simply took some of your food and you gave it to a Kohen. It doesn't even look like you're doing a tikkun. On top of the fact that it's not discernible to the eye. So maybe one would have thought that it's permitted. That's why we have to say that it's usher. Back inside the Gemara, paid the Tefilla Ma'esmal, when you may not take off Trumas U'Maiseris. If you could have done it before Shabbos, before Yom Tov. We learned this above. Aval paid the Tefilla Ha'itna, but if the only time where the obligation came into effect was on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, the example will be on Yom Tov, Kigoin Isam, because you only have to separate challah after you need the flour and the water, which may be done on Yom Tov. So if you needed a dough today, you can only give challah right now, la'afrushim in a challah. So you couldn't have done it yesterday. You had no dough yesterday. Then indeed, mafreshinon, you separate the challah, the yavina l'koyin, and you give it to the koyin on Yom Tov because it could not have done prior to. Okay. Asks the Gemara on all of the above. The word Shavuos we are familiar with. Shavuos is normally it's Asur Midrabanan, and for Shabbos and Yom Tov you have a unique word that's exclusively used, Shavuos. The word that is Shavuos doesn't imply a prohibition. The word mitzvah doesn't imply a prohibition. In other words, they are all, even the Shavuos is Asur Mishum Shavuos. Even the mitzvah, the ones that were mentioned, are asur mishum shvus. That has to be clarified. Or, and next question, mishum mitzvah ika mishum shvus leka. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak loy mi boye ka'amar. Loy mi boye shvus geredes, the first category in the Mishnah, in the mitzvah, in the Mishnah that had no mitzvah element at all. Of course, they're asur. The Mishnah wants to just emphasize the novelty. El afilu shvus, the reshus, even when we speak about Rishus, again, Rishus, Rashi here use 4 different expressions pointing out the meaning of some mitzvah element. He writes the words lichluch, lachluchias, mitzvah, ksas mitzvah, shemes mitzvah, I'm reading from Rashi, kirvus mitzvah, nira mitzvah, even Rishus is also prohibited. And then, v'loimi boy shvus the Rishus the asir, ella, afilu shvus the mitzvah, still, the Chachamim have a koyach to say, don't do it on Shabbos and on Yom Tov, nami asir. Then the Mishnah concluded that actually all of the examples that were given in the Mishnah of Shavusin were said initially regarding Yom Tov, and certainly regarding Shabbos. And the Mishnah concludes, Ein bein Shabbos li Yom Tov, Ein bein Yom Tov li Shabbos. I'm going in the wrong direction. Ein bein Yom Tov li Shabbos, elam oichel nefesh bolvad. Now, Chevra, if you just learned this Perek, the Flamet Heomid Beis, the Mishnah began, the Perek begins by telling you that you are allowed to lower produce through a skylight to prevent financial loss on Yom Tov and not on Shabbos. Here you go, there is a difference. V'nemini, the end of the narrow lines. Mashilin derech haruba b'Yom Tov v'lei b'Shabbos. So, and that's not only oichel nefesh, it's not about food, it's about saving your things. So indeed, Amar Rabbi Yosef loy kasha must be that Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer means that our Mishnah that says Ein bein Yom Tov l'Shabbos elo oichel nefesh bulvad follows Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer does not allow financial loss to be a mitigating factor even on Yom Tov. Rabbi Eliezer does not allow for you to lower anything through your skylight on Yom Tov. If you can't do it on Shabbos, you can't do it on Yom Tov. The Mishnah Daf Lamed Vav Amid Beis, our Mishnah follows Rabbi Yeshua, that he does allow financial losses to be a mitigating factor, and it allows us to find a tatum on Yom Tov. Tanya, where do we find that?
Not under Ochel Nefesh, correct? According to Rabbi Yeshua, it's a different way of allowing us to put it down. It's not mitzad Ochel Nefesh, Tzorich Nefesh, correct?
In other words, the Mishnah at the beginning of the Perek has nothing to do with food, it has to do with financial loss. Clear. Clear. Now, of the Tanya, if a mother, and according to some, the father, and its offspring, which may not be slaughtered on the same day. Now, the reason why animals are not muks on Yom Tov is because you can shech them. But if a mother and a child falls into a pit on Yom Tov, you want to take them out, not to eat them, you want to just save them. They shouldn't be stuck in the pit. You got a problem because one of them is muksa. One you can shecht, one you cannot. And indeed, Rabbi Eliezer says you can only bring up one of the two. Almanas l'shoichta, you can't bring it up to save it. You bring it up because you have to at least have the potential of slaughtering it and shecht it. So at least it's not muksa because it's oichel nefesh. And the other one, which is in dire straits in the pit, well, you put food in there. Provided sustenance in the pit to do what you are allowed to do for it not to die. But we don't say that since it might die nonetheless, it's stuck in a pit, figure out a heter to bring it up. Rabbi Eliezer does not take into account financial loss to somehow be able halachically to override Yom Tiv. But Rabbi Yeshua Aimer, no, I'll tell you how to do it. In other words, he gives more credence to a potential financial loss. So bring up any one of the two. When you bring it up, you're saying, I bring it up because I want to eat it, but then don't shecht it. And then change your mind. And that's called halachic subterfuge. A ha'arama, that's accepted. And bring up the second one in order to shecht it. And now you get to pick which one you shecht. So here, you see from this machlokes that Rabbi Yeshua gives more power to financial loss, and therefore the author of the Mishnah Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis is Rabbi Yeshua. And to that, Amalei Abaya, I completely to Rabbi Yosef, I don't accept your comparison. Mimai Dilma Atkan Likam Rabbi Eliezer Hassan. The reason why Rabbi Eliezer does not allow you to use a halachic subterfuge, because the efsher beparnasa, because who says the other animal will die? You put food in the pit. But over here, in the case of the rain, it's about to rain. If you won't be allowed to lower things through the skylight, things will get ruined. Maybe even Rabbi Eliezer will allow for you to lower it. And guys, don't forget, only on Yom Tov and not on Shabbos. The reason why the Yeshua allows you to bring both animals up is because the efshel arume. Because I know it's subterfuge, but indeed, if I brought up animal number one and I really changed my mind, I'm allowed to bring up animal number two. When I bring up animal number two, it's not muktzah, because I'm going to shecht only animal number two. But over here, in the case of lowering produce, which is tircha, there's no harama, loy, and therefore that does not work. We're back to the contradiction. The Mishnah Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis Ein Bein Yom Tov L'Shabbos Elo Oichel Nefesh Bilvad is following the shita of Beis Shammai, and the Mishnah Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis is following the shita of Beis Hillel, which is, as we learned ourselves, regarding and interestingly, we're going to now explain that lowering something through a skylight, it's not only about tircha, it's about someone who's less concerned of you end up transporting it out of that domain into another domain. The more you are concerned with the malacha of hoitza'ah, the more you're going to be goized, don't move anything. Not because of tircha, but because of muktzah. The link between tiltul and hoitzah is here. Beitzah Daf Lamed Zayin. Ditnan Beshama Yomim Ein Moitziin Lo Yasakoten. We had this above. V'lo Yasalulav V'lo Yasasefer Teil L'Reshus Harabim. We don't say Mitoich Shehutra Hoitzah Lo Otzoyrech Oichel Nefesh Hutra Hoitzah even when there's no Oichel Nefesh, or completely Shaloi L'Tzoyrech. And Beis Hillel, they are matir. In other words, it's only Beis Hillel that allows the lowering of produce. Beis Shammai will not allow for you to lower the produce, not because of tircha, but because it's muktzah, according to Beis Shammai. The Gemara says, what are you talking about? There's hoitzah and there's muktzah. The Mishnah Daf Yud Beis is about carrying from Reshus HaYachid to Reshus HaRabbi, carrying daladamas Reshus HaRabbi. But tiltul, which is the topic of Lamed Hey Amud Beis, which is only a derabanan, then who says that they're going to be machmer? Answers the Gemara, Otto tiltul lav soirech hoitzau. But b'chlal, the whole muktzah isn't connected in order to prevent people from carrying. There is a link. The larger the issue with hoitzah, the more things will be asur with tiltul. That's the sheet of the Ravid. Gavaldik. And therefore, again, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and according to Beis Shammai, you may not lower produce through the skylight, and therefore, according to Beis Shammai, Ein Bein Yom Tov L'Shabbos Elo Oichel Nefesh Bilvad. It's Gavaldik. And Beis Shammai also doesn't hold of Mitoich. The only difference is Oichel Nefesh. Okay, Chavre, we are starting the sugya of Tchumen. On Shabbos, we're not.
One more time. Beis Shammai is Ein Bein.
Mamish, yes, of course. It's so perfect.
Okay.
In other words, not only is there no mitoich, but more than that, you may not lower through the skylight. Okay, now.
I was wondering the whole time, what about carrying? But now this answers that, because the carrying that's allowed according to Beis Shammai is only for Eichel Nefesh. So then it's really fits.
Well, the case of the Mishnah is that if I have a Reshus HaYochid, if the roof belongs to me and the house belongs to me, there's no carrying involved at all.
I understand, but for the Ein Bain part of it,
Very good, very good. That
it's
answers
only
everything.
Eichel Nefesh.
That answers everything. Gewaldig. Okay. Now, Tchum, Shabbos we can't carry, but we can walk. Nevertheless, let's go with the Midrabanan. Midrabanan, a person may not walk beyond the 2,000 Tchum boundary. From where do you measure it? If a person is shoives, if you take in Shabbos in a city, you only measure it once you leave the Ibura Shalir. If you took in Shabbos out there in the field, you have your Dalad Amas, and you begin measuring the 2,000 Amas right outside your Dalad Amas. However, came along the Chachamim, Shlomo HaMelech, and they said like this: you only have 2,000 Amas, but let's say I want to go to a place that's 3,000 Amas away, can't go there. There's a solution. It's not going to help me go 10,000 Amas, but it's going to help me go up. I can add up until 2,000 Amas. Like even if there's a city that's 3,999 Amas to the right, what you do is that you put food, which is you have to be within 2,000 Amas of the food, and your destination has to be within 2,000 Amas of that food. You're kind of shvisa with your food. It's as if you were there when Shabbos or Yom Tov came in, and now you can walk from your food 2,000 Amas. In other words, an Eruv Tchum doesn't really allow you to walk more than without making an Eruv. It just changes to where. You always are bound by 2,000 Amas here, 2,000 Amas there, 2,000 Amas in each direction. Question is, where is the center? You can place the center in another place. Now on Yom Tov, you can carry. So there's another nuance, and that is that all of my things, living things, inanimate things, they are bound to my tchum. Wherever I can go, they can be transported. Even if I'm not doing the carrying, wherever I may not go, they may not be transported. And final, third, that's too complicated, this picture. We don't need this picture. And the third nakuda is, it's not about ownership. It's not about what belongs to me. It's about under whose control is the item when Shabbos or Yom Tov came in. That's the key. So if I own an animal, but you're a shepherd, and I gave it to you before Yom Tov, since it was under your control, it goes by the shepherd's tchum. That's more or less. And the third case will be if something is owned by two partners, and each one placed the tchum in the opposite direction. So that limits what belongs to both of them. It can only be taken to an area that is common to both. And you know what? If one guy put an aid of 2,000 amas to the right and the other one put a 2,000 amas to the left, then this item cannot move at all. Okay, says the Holy Mishnah. We got the whole sugya now. Habehema, whether habehema means it's living things, or kalim, they are doimim, inanimate. The rule is keragle haba'olam. They only may be transported, I don't care by whom, to the same place where their owner is allowed to go and not beyond the 2,000 amma boundary. However, ba'alim normally means owner. Here it doesn't mean halachic owner. It means the one who is in control from when Shabbos or Yom Tov came in. And here are the examples. If you gave over your animal to your child on Yom Tov, or you gave it over to a shepherd on Yom Tov, which means that when Yom Tov came in, it was not in their possession, it was not under their control, then it remains, it remains bound to the tchum of the owner and not to the son and not to the shepherd, implying that if it would have been given over to them prior to Yom Tov, even though they don't own it, but then it would be bound by the boundary of the son, bound by the boundary of the shepherd. Next, if a father passes away and he left an estate and the children did not yet divide this estate, so the estate is called tfisas habayis. They are like partners. However, if there is a specific item that is designated to one of the children, it's not about ownership, but about control. Let's say we learned, if one son is in charge of dealing with the banks. And for that, he needs to have the fancy suit. So the suit legally belongs to all the brothers, but he's the one that wears it. If there is an item that we know is under the control of one, Hare Elu Kirag Lov, so then that item is only bound by the tchum of that child, even though they didn't divide the estate, even though really they all own it. I don't care. It's under his control. But if there's nothing designated to anyone, so it legally belongs to everyone, everyone de facto is using whatever they want, then Hare Elu Kimokim Shaholchin, then all of these items may only be taken to an area that's common to all of them, Gavaldik, to an area that's common to all of them. So if people have different boundaries, it further limits where this item can be taken to. Another thing, if a person borrows an item from his fellow before Yom Tiv, borrowing means he doesn't own it, but it's under his control, then Kiragli Hashoyel, then it's going to be bound to the boundary, to the tchum of the borrower, like we mentioned, because it's about under whose control is it when Yom Tov comes in. However, be Yom Tov, but if you borrowed an article on Yom Tov, when Yom Tov came in, it was in the hands of the lender, then Kiragli Hamashal, then it still is bound by the tchum of the lender. And therefore, a great example will be if a woman is going to borrow from her neighbor on Yom Tov. That's normal. You're cooking, you're baking, and you're missing something. So she's going to borrow spices, or she's going to even borrow water or salt, right? And she's making a dough. And she's doing that on Yom Tov. So think about it. The spices, when Yom Tov came in, was by the neighbor. The spices is bound by the tchum of the neighbor. But the flour is from this woman, from the borrower. Now you have an item that has a mixture of both. So now this item is bound, can only be taken to an area that's common to both. And a detail, Rabbi Yehuda says, listen, I agree with the spices and with the salt. These are items that are at least sometimes recognizable, sometimes not. But sometimes you can see the little piece of pepper. Sometimes the salt is a granule that you can discern. But water, which gets so absorbed in the dough that it's completely not noticeable, you don't even see its mitzias. So because of that, then even though the water belonged to the neighbor, to the lender, when Yom Tov came in, it doesn't limit the place to where you can take the baked loaf, because the partnership, the part is completely not noticeable. But the principle we get from the Mishnah. Something belongs to me and you. If we don't share the same tchum, then this item can only be can be taken to an area that's common to both of us. Okay. Says the Gemara. Daniel Ram is saying hi to everyone. Says the Gemara, Masnisin, why the Tanya Rabbi or other people say Abu Shol says on the top, if you purchased an animal from your fellow on Erev Yom Tov, but you didn't take control over it, you paid for it, you didn't take it. Nevertheless, because since it was the seller's intention from before Yom Tov to hand it over to the buyer on Yom Tov, so it's about the intention. Guys, so far, so good. Hold on. Which part of the Mishnah is not like it? Next. Next case, if you give over your animal to a shepherd, here again, even though you only gave it over to him during Yom Tov, similar note, since you knew from before Yom Tov that you're going to give it over to the shepherd, so it doesn't bother me that it wasn't under the shepherd's control when Yom Tov came in. Our Mishnah seemingly doesn't say that. Our Mishnah emphasizes it's about under whose control is it when Yom Tov comes in. So the Gemara says, no, they can go together. And the Beitzah that we just quoted is when there is only one shepherd. That means you knew to which shepherd you're going to give it to. There's only one shepherd. Then I don't care if de facto you did not give it yet, since it's known that you will give it, known to you. However, the Mishnah's case was there were two shepherds. And therefore, since it's not known, you did not know to which shepherd you're going to give it to. Therefore, you have to actually give it to them from before Yom Tov for the animal to be bound to the shepherd's tchum. And Daikanami, the Mishnah gave always your son or your shepherd. That's a very important. In other words, you had options. You had options whom to give it to. Shema mina, that when there are no options, when there's only one person, then we indeed assume that you're going to give it over to the shepherd, and even though you only gave it on Yom Tov, it's only bound to the tchum of the shepherd. When he heard the Beitzah halachic Rabbi Yossi, which sounds like, according to him, Rabbi Doisa argues with the Mishnah. The Gemara asks, hold on, mi Rabbi Yechanan hachi? Didn't Rabbi Yechanan say halachic is stam Mishnah, and ours is a stam Mishnah? The question is based on the premise that our Mishnah and Rabbi Doisi, they disagree. And also the Tanan, here we go. So the Gemara answered, no problem. Didn't we just explain that our Mishnah and the Beitzah are not in disagreement? Our Mishnah and Rabbi Doisi are saying one and the same. Rabbi Doisi is speaking about when there's only one shepherd, and so is the halacha. Our Mishnah is where there were two options. So there, we have to actually transfer it over from before Yom Tov for it to be clear that it's going to be under that person's control, and only then is it bound by the royas or by the son's tchum. Very good. Before Yom Tov, partnership. Two people borrowed a shirt. Now, two people don't wear a shirt at the same time, but that was their agreement. One person says that they borrowed it before Yom Tov, guys. It was under the control of both before Yom Tov. And they made up. And he's going there in the morning. It's interesting, it's ironic. In other words, not both to Beis HaMedrash. One guy is the learner, one guy is the partier, fine. And each one's location demanded for them to make an eid of Tchum in opposite directions. So the point is, can only go to the Tzafin limited by the one who put the eid of L'Darim, because the more you put the eid of in the Darim, the less you have on the Tzafin. Similarly, Mahalach only L'Darim Kerag L'Mish eid of L'Tzafin. In other words, the garment must stay in the area common to both individuals. Very simple. And furthermore, that's if everyone only put their eid of Tchum less than 2,000 amas in their direction. But the last narrow line, if they established the Tchum, mamish at the limit means if I put my Tchum to the Darim, almost 2,000 amas. You know what that means? That means I can't go to the Tzafin at all. So then the garment is stuck. That's the Nakuda, that whatever belongs to two people, if they don't share a common tchum, the item is bound to only the areas where both of them can go. It's very low.
Can you say the fact that they emphasize who's going to wear it when? Maybe their ownership's split. One's going to own it half the day, the other half.
Thank you, Rabbi Chaim. The chiddush is that even though they specified me in the morning, you in the afternoon, one might have thought that since they said, Ki'ilu, I'm in the morning, we should view it that in the morning it's completely mine. That's what you might have thought. And therefore, it can be taken to anywhere I can go. Says the Gemara, no. Since you are a partner, since we borrowed it together, we are both responsible. That's probably how you do it. We're both chayv achrayis. So then I'm bound by your tchum. Very good. Itmer, now here we go. Here we have the case of the machlekes. Guys, we'll go as far as we can go. This is Gavaldik Asud. Guys, the beginning of the wide line. Shnayim shelokchu chavius ubehema b'shutfus. Here again, it's important just to get this thing clear. They entered a partnership before Yom Tov. And you know what they decided? They decided before Simchas Torah that on Yom Tov, half of the barrel to you, half of the barrel to me. On Yom Tov, we're going to shech the animal, half to you, half to me. Very good. So, l'chayda, based on what we learned until now, since when Yom Tov came in, it belonged to two people. It's can only be taken to an area common to both. However, look at this. Comes along Rav, and he differentiates between the behema and the barrel. It's very similar to Rabbi Chaim, to what you were getting to. But before we were speaking about a shirt. by a shirt, everyone, when they take the shirt, when I take it shachris, I take the whole shirt. When you take the shirt, the maitiv, you take the whole shirt. Here by the barrel of wine, when we divide the barrel on Yom Tov, I took half and you took half. You understand the issue here? So now the question is, let's just speak it out. If we subscribe to retroactive clarification, let's speak about the barrel of wine, one can argue that it's not like when Yom Tov came in, all of it was under my control and your control, which limits where you can take it. No, half was mine, half was yours. I don't know which half until when we divided it, but once we divided it, it's retroactively clarifying whatever I took was always only mine. If it's only mine, then it should be free to be taken to everywhere I can go. So therefore, the Haftaka says, Chavius Muteres means that the fellows, the other partner who did not get that half, doesn't impose any boundary on it. However, by the animal, even though we shechted it and we divided it, nevertheless, asura, it remains bound to only an area that's common to both, even though they divide. Now the question is, but you get, first of all, we get both the animal and the chavis is not the shirt, because when I take the shirt for those hours, I take all of the shirt. Here, you take a divided and you get it in half.
Yeah, Rabbi, when it says the chavius, it's not talking about I'm taking the whole barrel. I'm just taking my contents.
Okay, very good. Right. And guys, we're not even talking about the barrel. We're not talking about the container. We're talking about the wine. Very important. In other words, once it's divided, everyone has only half. If you hold a bereda, you should be less limited. So now
an animal also, you're shechting it. Now we're splitting the meat, and I have my
everything in it. Same thing. Everyone gets half. We're speaking about that which is solely mine, that which is solely yours. Shmuel disagrees, and Shmuel says that he agrees with the animal. He says chavius nami asura. Now Shmuel makes sense because Shmuel does not subscribe to bereda. When Yom Tov came in, that item was under both control, so it's always bound, even after they divide it. But the Rav, like, what's this difference between a behema and a chavis? If he holds the eish bereda, which is the only reason why he can be matir the chavis, then afilu behema tishteri. After you divide the animal, let's go retroactively. That half was always only under my control. And the ikasavar, like Shmuel, ein bereda, afilu chavis namis asura. So the Gemara says, indeed, you're right. It's about bereda. Shmuel does not hold of bereda. Rav holds of bereda, but lo'olam Rav holds of bereda. And that's why chavis is muteres. Muteres means it's only bound by the tchum of the one who got his half. However, the shanya behema, how is the behema different? Listen to this logic. The koyonki tchumin mahadadi. Since when the animal was alive on the onset of Yom Tov. Let's go bereda. If I got the right half and you got the left half, the right half was always mine, Seder. But when the animal was alive, the right half's life was dependent on the left half. If you would have cut the animal in half, it would have died. So it was getting its sustenance from the other part of the animal. So since your half of the animal is bound by your tchum, even my half of the animal, when Yom Tov came in, was bound by your tchum, unlike wine. Wine is not deriving sustenance from anything. And therefore, each portion continues, verstehst, to be bound by the tchum of the other. As our logic. So, Omri le'Rav Kahana v'Ravasi l'Rav, if you accept this concept of yonki tchumen, I have a bigger issue. Let me just say that by heart. Guys, there's no problem. I'm allowed to eat your food. No one is going to say that your food is muksa to me. Why? It was never say my food was designated mukhan to be eaten. We are yidden. We share things. If my food is mukhan for me, it's automatically mukhan for any other person. But when two people plan to divide something on Yom Tov, the whole concept of a dividing of a partnership is, at that moment, what's yours is yours and what's mine is mine. That's not dividing a partnership. If we're going to subscribe to bereda, that Ke'ilu half was meant to be mine and the other half yours, your half should be muksa to me. When you divide a food item on Yom Tov as partners, the one that is yours, especially if you hold of Bereida, that means from the outset we view that there's a half that's mine and the other half is yours. The one that's yours, the act of division makes it muksa for me. Now I got a big problem. If we subscribe to the koyonki mahadadi, since we only divided the animal, we shechted it on Yom Tov, which means when Yom Tov came in, my half was deriving nourishment from your half. That means the status of muksa of your half should permeate my half. If you're going to subscribe to koyonki tchumen, why are you only concerned about yonki tchumen? Why, in other words, Rav is saying that the animal can only be moved to an area that's common to both. But in the area that's common to both, you can move it. How can you even move it there? And only
Rabbi, can you explain this muksa concept again? I'm sorry. Why is it?
Okay, let's go a few steps. Number one, we're going with Bereida. So let's say me and you own an animal. Now, then I guess if you own an animal, no one is going to say that I cannot move your animal. It's muksa for me. Why would it be muksa for me? The animal is yours, and you're a yid. Part of your designation is for you to eat it and for you to share it. But when you divide a partnership, the whole movement of dividing a partnership is at that moment, there's the opposite of sharing. Dividing a partnership means I'm taking, for me, midas sudai, shali shali and shalach shalach. We're making a division. The act of dividing a partnership should render yours, what's yours should be muksa from me. Let's go with that premise.
It has to be that way, or it sounds like
that's the premise of the question. Obviously, Rav won't agree with that, but that's the premise of the question. Now, if we're going to say if
that was the case, how can I shecht an animal? Because I have it's muksa that belongs to you.
That's exactly his point. How can partners shecht an animal? How can you divide? In other words, now again, another thing, Danny, if you don't subscribe to Bereida, I don't have a problem. When I'm shechting the animal, it belongs to both of us. But if you subscribe to Bereida, that means after you divide it, it was from the outset, mine was mine from the beginning, yours was yours and not mine from the beginning of Yom Tov. Not mine, meaning your part is muksa, and because it was living, it was yonki mahadadi, it was deriving nourishment, each half from the other half. So each half should make the other half muksa. And Rav didn't answer, just like Rav. And Bachlal, you should know that Hasidus bring so often from these statements. This is not the only time. Rav, especially Rav didn't answer. According to many Rishonim, it's not because he accepted the question. He didn't have words to answer. The whole idea of Chachma and Bina, just because you don't have the right answer doesn't mean you're wrong. He was quiet, and according to many, but he still remained with his shita. For Tchumen, we say Yanki Tchumen Ma'adadi, and for Muksa, we don't say Yanki Muksa Ma'adadi. Okay. Now, my Hava Allah means, my Hava Allah regarding Bereida. Bereida or not, at least by the barrel of wine, there's no issue, right? Bereida or not. Once we divide the barrel of wine on Yom Tov, can I take it to anywhere I can go? Or am I still stuck with your Tchum? Machlekes. Rab Hoishaya Amar Yesh Bereida, and therefore my half after you divide it can be taken to anywhere I can go. Rabbi Yechanan Amar like Shmuel Ein Bereida. So there says the Gemara, Sama Rab Hoishaya Yesh Bereida. Rabbi Hoishaya doesn't subscribe to that. Vehatanan, guys, we learned this on Daf Yud, so we can review it. Bekitzer, a corpse gives off tumas oil, not only under the same roof, but if there's a doorway. Even if the door is closed, but the mace is going to be going through that doorway, anything under the doorway area is included in tumas oil. Now, what's going to happen if you have a room that has many openings and each one has a doorway, even if they're all closed? If we don't yet know through which doorway the mace is going to go, it permeates tumah to that which is under all of the doorways. Let's begin. Hameis babayis, there's a corpse. Envelope sacham harbe, and there's many doorways, and we don't yet know through which one the mace will be taken out. So this halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that even though the door is closed, and something is on the other side of the door, but it's under the doorway, it also is included in Tumas Oil, Kulam Tameim. But once it's determined from which doorway the mace will go through, Niftach Echad Mehem, then only Hu Tamei and items that are on the other side of a closed door, even though it's in the doorway area, are Tohidim. Now, next case. What happens if what happens if they're all closed? But the person already, the one who is in control, determined mentally through which door the mace will go out, whether it's a doorway, whether it's a window. So the din is, the Tanakama holds, matzeles al apsachim kulam, that mental designation will limit the tuma of the doorway to only the one that you intend to take the mace through. However, comes along Bishame and they say, when your machshava alone will have the power to take away tuma from the other doorways, only if you had that intention before there was a mace. Once a mace died, and before your machshava, halacha l'moshe misinai, all of the doorways, anything under it will become tamei. Then something was brought under the doorway, then your machshava cannot change the status. Once there is tumah, it cannot remove the tumah. No. Af mishiyamus hameis, even mishiyamus hameis, yet your machshava will limit the tumah. Now the question is, libesilal, that your machshava is powerful. Is it only mikano lahaba or is it retroactive? And that even lebesilel, it's only letaydas hapsachim mikano lahaba. Your machshava only helps that if something was brought under a doorway, under doorway number 2, after you decided to take the mace outside doorway number 1, then is the item under doorway number 2 not going to become tamei. But if something was there prior to your machshava, you don't go retroactive. In other words, the Gemara points out, based on the statement of Rabbi Hoshaya, only mikano lahaba in lemafrei aloi. Now, if Rabbi Hoshaya will hold of Breida, it should go even lemafreya. And because of that, the Gemara says, indeed, Eipach, Rabbi Hoshaya is the one that says ein Breida. He is the one that paskins like Shmuel. He's the one that says that our barrel, even after we divided it, my contents will continuously be bound by your tchum as well as mine. And Rabbi Yochanan is the one that says, Yesh Breida. You know what, Chevra, we'll stop over here, and we're going to have a problem with Rabbi Yochanan, and we're going to see over here again, like we mentioned in the introduction, the big difference between Breida and Midoiraisa on Dinei Doiraisa, which we paskin, we don't say Breida on Dinei Toira, and we paskin that yes, we say Breida on Dinei Derabanan. To be continued.
This
This was a great daf.